Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. I'm Riki Ellison. I'm the founder and chairman of the Missile Defense Advocacy Alliance. We founded the alliance in 2002. It is a nonprofit alliance that is focused on the education and advocacy of the development, deployment, and evolution of missile defense. We believe missile defense makes the world safer and makes our nation safer. I personally got involved with missile defense in 1980 with President Ronald Reagan in 1983. His speech of the Strategic Defense Initiative began the relationship with Israel. Israel was one of the first ever to sign the MOU with President Reagan. In 1984, I had the opportunity to visit Israel in the Lebanon-Israeli border and spend a couple days up there right after that fight that happened a year prior. We have visited Israel quite a bit during the early 2000s and mid-2000s as the missile threat was clear and apparent in 2006. And we have been a strong advocate for the development of, I think, the world's greatest and best layered missile defense system that's in deployment and operation today. And now, as you see, the Iron Dome system that was first put on as an idea and put in place in 2007, and then funded jointly by the United States government and Israel, starting in 2010. And that amount was, I think, is about $1.5 billion that's been put in play to work to create this great system. This system is now 10 years old. We are now in the midst of probably one of the highest volume rocket attacks that Israel has seen. The system has done very well. The system has protected close to 4.5 million people. It has prevented a war. And it's something that is absolutely vital and necessary, regardless of your ability to have a left of launch offensive capability, which Israel has one of the best in the world. The defense is clearly required and needed. So today, we are very honored and very fortunate to have two great speakers to present to you a much more detailed and much more thoughtful analysis of both the actual threat, what it is, where it's going, and what the systems that we have in place and our partnership between Israel and the United States in place to defend against that threat. Tal Inbar, a great friend of ours, he has testified and been in front of the United States Congress with us in 2016. He was with us in Berlin, where we brought him together with our NATO allies and had him give a threat briefing on the Iranian threat. He is a world expert. This is what he does for a living, for a passion. He is in Tel Aviv today. He lives in Tel Aviv. He's been there and has been on the phone with me during strikes that are happening on a daily basis. So I would like to pass that over and introduce you to Tal Inbar, a great advocate, expert on missile defense. Thank you.
Thank you, Riki, for the kind words and the introduction and the invitation to this special event. And actually, it is under fire because what you heard before are some alerts, and now several rockets got on its way to the southern part of Israel. And less than 30 minutes ago, at least 3 rockets came from the northern part of Israel, from South Lebanon. So this is not a theoretical discussion for us. So it's a reality of our daily life in the last few days, and in generally speaking for years. And today also marks a special event for Iron Dome with the first operational kill of an armed or a suicide UAV launched from Gaza. So it was the first time we knew that Iron Dome has those capabilities, but for the first time in operational use, we knocked down a UAV fired against us. So it's an interesting day with a lot of challenges ahead. So if you could put the presentation, please. I want to go a little bit and explain what happened in the last few days. Started, by the way, just this Monday with several rockets fired from Gaza by Hamas against Jerusalem. And it was 2014 that the previous firing of some rockets from Gaza to Jerusalem. And by the way, it was during my presentation in a missile defense conference in that city. So next slide, please. Could you please? Okay. So generally speaking, Hamas has two families of rockets. One family is imported rockets from Iran and from Syria and from various other sources, but this is now becoming obsolete. You can see on the next slide that the current line of Hamas rockets are domestically produced basically on foreign, initially on a foreign know-how. Some knowledge came from Iran, no doubt about it. And in this conflict here in Israel in this week, we saw the first use, massive use of hundreds of heavy rockets for a longer range of more than 100 kilometers. You can see the gray one with the letter A on it. So we saw a lot of those rockets recently. Next, please. And we also been witness to several methods used by Hamas to counter the efficiency of our missile defense systems. One way is saturation, large salvos of rockets in a short time period, and we are speaking about more than 100 rockets per city for a period of time of less than 5 minutes, and firing from different azimuth simultaneously. This is another method that Hamas is thinking will be useful for them. And low trajectory, almost line of sight. We saw it also during this conflict. Next, please. And just as the current round of firing started, Hamas released some videos of large-scale exercises that they conducted in an unannounced date. And now we can see for the first time in the open several of the Hamas tactics. And you can see here some launchers. Each of those launchers are, again, locally manufactured, and it contains 8 rockets. Next, please. Next slide. Yeah, and you can see this is the heavy rocket for long range. 8 of those rockets could be fired in several seconds from each of those launchers. Next. And you can see the loading of those very heavy rockets, and they have all fixed wings, and they are not spin stabilized, which of course affects their accuracy. But then again, the main idea of Hamas is targeting cities, and cities are, of course, not a moving target. So it doesn't matter for Hamas in which part of a city they will hit. But actually, the spread of the rocket is quite large. Next. And this is a shorter range, around 40 kilometers. Next one, you can see also those type of rockets. Next, please. And of course, all the rockets are fired from a distance. They could be fired remotely. They could also use the time mechanisms to make some simultaneously fired rockets from the different places without putting the people that are firing the rockets in the proximity of the rockets, so they are more immune from immediate attack against the launchers. Next, please. Again, you can see the craftsmanship, and of course, I still remember the first very crude rockets fired from Gaza in the early 2000s, and they came a long way. And you can see the level of production, and it is like almost like a state-owned facility that produces those rockets. Next. So this is the rocket for 40 kilometers, again, made by Hamas. Next one. And the next one, we can see several more shots from the same drill, and we'll move ahead. And this is the site of the night sky of Tel Aviv with a lot of Iron Dome interceptors. This is something quite unusual, even for us, for me, and I saw several times those type of interceptions above me, but to see for the same period of time, short period of time, dozens of Iron Domes interceptors in the air, this is something that we didn't see, and you could see it in a minute in a short video. Next slide. You can see the Ben Gurion Airport, and each of those tiny dots in the sky, you can see this is interceptors. And by the way, last night there was an Israeli airplane coming back to landing in Ben Gurion Airport, Tel Aviv Airport, and it was forced to make some circles in the air, and one of the passengers took a short video from the air. Next, please. And you can see here, this is amazing, because you can almost count those missiles. All of those are Iron Dome interceptors, and you can see around 40 missiles at the same time. It was fired in the first night of the current round of rocket firing from Gaza. Next, please. We can see the next slide. And this is the result. This is from yesterday afternoon or early evening. This is in the southern city of Sderot, and a small 5-year-old kid was killed during this attack. And you can see this is a direct hit, a result of a very shallow trajectory of the rocket coming from Gaza. Next, please. And this is from the city of Petah Tikva, very close to Tel Aviv. One rocket fell between 3 buildings, and a large fire was started. And you can see the results of the blast with all the windows shattered and so on. Luckily, no one got hurt in this attack. And again, it was a very heavy rocket. Next, please. And some parts, those are pictures that you can see on Israeli social media all the time. People are finding some fragments of incoming rockets, and also fragments from the interceptors. So you can see a lot of this. And even a small fragment of such a large rocket falling, it could cause a serious damage. Next. Okay, so and today we saw the first use of very sophisticated, relatively to the crude UAVs that Hamas used in the past. Next slide, please. Hamas showed today this type of propaganda video from which I took those slides, and you can see the very, very close similarity in the design of this armed UAV and Iranian UAVs, which I believe is the basis of this design. Next, please. And also we can find those type of armed UAV in the hands of the Houthis in Yemen. So you can see the spread of knowledge from Iran to its proxies. It could be in Lebanon, it could by Hezbollah, it could be Islamic Jihad, Hamas, and so on. And you can see how this system is constructed. And today, Israel shot down several of those UAVs. And one of the interceptions was carried out by an Iron Dome. Again, the first ever operational use of Iron Dome against the UAV. Next, please. And you can see here the UAV is now just leaving the launch rail and heading towards our country. Next one. If you could show the video, this is one of the interceptions of Hamas UAV. It was done, this one specifically was carried out by an air-to-air missile from one of our Air Force aircrafts. So if you could see the video, please. You can see it here in the target, and it was destroyed by an air-to-air missile. Next one, please. So this is the last one, so you can start looking at me. Just to wrap up a little bit, we are witnessing a real 360 degrees active defense now in operation with rockets from the south and rockets from the north and UAV threats. And I didn't speak about the threat of incoming cruise missiles, but again, this is a major challenge. And we know how to cope with it, but it will be the next phase, I believe, in future conflicts, like we see in Saudi Arabia and the cruise missiles fired by the Houthis, and the accurate missiles, the accuracy revolution that started several years ago. And we know for a fact that the knowledge of creating and building and converting statistical rockets into accurate rockets is existing in both parts of our country, both in Lebanon by Hezbollah and in the south, but we didn't see any use of precise and accurate rocket yet here in Israel, but I think this is the next level. So active defense like Iron Dome, like David Sling and so on, and of course the Arrow is essential for our security, and it is my belief that it will be a major improvement of all maneuvering forces around the world. And just recently, we heard about the purchase of 2 batteries by the US from Israel of Iron Dome. So I believe we will see more and more use of this system in more than one theater of operations. Thank you.
Thank you, Tal. That was an amazing rundown. How are your perspective? How is inflation, your friends are reacting to this barrage of 100 rockets in there? Is there a panic? Is there confidence in what's going on? Or are they, how are they reacting to having this happen right now?
Well, it is unfortunate that the general public got used to being bombarded with rockets for years. So in that regard, many people are not in panic during the siren. Of course, small children is a totally different story. And I have an example here in my house. I have a daughter who is 14 tomorrow, by the way, and she is worried about some rockets during her birthday. And my boy is 12. And they are not used to get into the shelter, and they hear the sirens in the 1:15 a.m. or 3 in the morning. So it is quite a stressing situation for them. But generally speaking, the people here is very used to this type of situation in which for several days we have a large quantity of rockets, more than 1,300 already since Monday afternoon. But they also have a lot of confidence in the active defense and in the shelters that we have in most of our houses and apartments.
Well, that clearly shows the confidence in the system that was put in play in the vision of both our governments, and certainly your government developed that capability. When you, one more question, but when you said there were 40 40, that seems like a whole battery round of interceptors up there. Is that, I mean, I would assume that you would have to refill that battery to launch again. And the capacity issue, is that a concern now? Are we on top of the capacity as this thing continues to ramp up?
Well, I cannot, of course, of obvious reasons, go into the specifics and the numbers, but we don't have an endless amount of interceptors, and you are correct. We need some time to replace the canisters and so on. I won't go into details on this, but it was not an issue that prevented any city in Israel to be protected in this round.
Well, thank you. We're going to have a question and answer period after Dave, our next speaker, presents. If you want to ask questions, we've got the chat going on right now on YouTube. And if you want to email them directly at questions@missiledefenseadvocacy.org, we can do that. So I think we're going to go to Dave on the next set of questions and movement, because certainly for most of us, we can't understand this kind of volume is being put out there from a very small, relatively small area that we can't find ways to be able to stop it from going, as well as, we're doing the effective part of it of shooting it down, but we got to, why is that such a challenge for Israel to be able to prevent that massive missiles, the size of the missiles that you saw on that? So that would be an interesting part. Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker is the former commander of the AAMDC, the Army Missile Defense Commands. There's only about 4 of them in the world today that have special areas of responsibility. Dave was the previous European 10th AAMDC commander. At that time, not today, but at that time, he was responsible for all planning and operations to support the defense of Israel with Army air missile defense. He is also very well qualified. He is just out of the job of being the commandant of our Army Artillery Air Defense School in Fort Sill, Oklahoma. He comes with a perspective that I think is invaluable at this time with working with Israel to give us those perspectives. Welcome, Dave.
Hey, thanks, Ricky, and really many thanks to you and the entire Missile Defense Advocacy Alliance for having me today, and truly a privilege to be here and to share my experiences as the 10th AAMDC commander, as well as my time at Fort Sill as the acting commandant. And Tal, you're a hard act to follow, but great presentation and a phenomenal laydown of the enemy capabilities that the state of Israel is facing right now. We talked briefly earlier about a 360-degree threat, and that is in fact what the state of Israel does face. I think first and foremost, if I may, the most important factor or key point during my time and my experience working with the Israeli Air Defense Forces and the Israeli Defense Forces is the relationship. And the relationship that you establish personally with my peers, but it's also every service member in the formation and the relationships that were established from peer to peer. There's something special, no doubt in my mind that Israel is the strongest partner in that region to the United States, and it clearly shows, and it shows both from a U.S. perspective, but also from an Israeli perspective. I have many friends in Israel today because of my time as the 10th Army Air Missile Defense Commander. As Ricky mentioned, the capacity and the capability within the United States Army Air Defense Artillery inventory is currently today a challenge. As most know, today the U.S. Army possesses 15 Patriot battalions, 8 THAAD batteries, 2 battalions that have contributed to the counter-rocket artillery and mortar mission sets in Iraq and in Afghanistan over the last 20 years. One of the newest formations in the U.S. Army Air Defense Artillery Inventory is the 1st Maneuver Short Range Air Defense Battalion stationed in Germany. In addition to that, there are a number of AN TPY-2 forward-based radars. And then, as Tal mentioned, there are 2 Iron Dome batteries currently being tested. American soldiers are training with the intent to position these batteries to locations yet to be determined by the U.S. government and the Department of Defense. So that's the current laydown of what the U.S. Army possesses today. And for anyone who has served, there's a high demand, yet a low density of these systems. Tal also talked about the enemy possesses tens of thousands, and in this case, whether it's Hamas or Hezbollah, tens of thousands of rockets, easily outgunning the U.S. inventory. So the interceptor, the number of interceptors and the interceptor capability is also again not necessarily a high demand, but definitely low density when you're comparing the U.S. inventory to an adversary's potential inventory. And in this case, the Hamas and Hezbollah terrorist organizations. So where is the U.S. Army heading? Well, we talked a little bit about the 1st Maneuver SHORAD Battalion, which is a Stryker-based platform weapon system with the Stinger missile capability mounted all weather, day, night, with onboard sensors. Also being tested and experimented with is the program writ large, the Army Integrated Air and Missile Defense Program. And part of that program is the new lower tier air missile defense radar, as well as what's known as an integrated fire control network. So, and what's the big deal about the integrated fire control network is the emphasis on all sensors connected, best shooter taking the engagement. So any sensor, best shooter, and then of course the lasers that are also being experimented with and tested in the United States. So the capacity and capability, Riki talked a little bit about left of launch. How do we get to the left of launch? And I think there's 3 areas that'll help us drive to get to the left of launch. That's the intelligence community and sharing of that intelligence, not just within a U.S. Network of intelligence, but with allies and partners. In this case, the State of Israel. Sensors, current sensors, and the way forward, and how you network these sensors, whether it's a sensor directly targeting low flight projectiles, such as whether it's some type of 107 millimeter, 122 millimeter rocket, or a cruise missile, and then of course space-based sensor capability. And then the third area of left of launch I would submit is the whole of government piece. And when you take and you look across not just the military aspect of whole of government, but you look across the diplomatic, the information, and the economical side of it, and then other capabilities within the whole of government that one possesses to again get to the left of launch, possibly through cyber means. Integrated and layered defense is critical, and the State of Israel and the Israeli Air Defense Forces, they have just that integrated and layered defense, from Iron Dome to the Patriot weapon system to David Sling to the Arrow system that's been discussed. They have that layered defense capability, and we're clearly seeing that demonstrated today with regards to the low-level threat and what the Iron Dome and the success that its system is having over the last 72 to 96 hours. Critical to capacity capability, getting to the left of launch, the integrated and layered defense is the network architecture. And so you must have that network, that capability, redundancy, where systems have the ability through technical means to talk to other systems, whether it's through a landline capability, whether it's through internet protocol capability, or whether it's through some type of other landline device or handheld for that matter. And then the last point, again, I just wanted to reinforce was the relationships piece. That if you have the positive relationship and you have that trust between one another, it's incredible what you can achieve. Real quickly, Riki, in the last 60 seconds, one of the best training events that I had the opportunity to participate in during my time as the commander of 10th Fellow NDC was one of the biannual exercises, the Juniper series, in this case Juniper Cobra. And we had the opportunity to actually airlift, hadn't been done in several years, but actually airlift in a Patriot battery while using sea lift capability to bring in the other soldiers in formation and equipment to participate in that exercise. It's a joint exercise that's been ongoing since the early 2000s with the Israelis. And obviously we train, you deploy to go to war locations. You conduct terrain walks of alternate locations, and then it culminated with an actual joint live fire exercise with the Israeli Air Defense Forces, which included Patriot and Iron Dome, near simultaneous engagement. Riki, I'll pause there and pass it back to you.
Thank you, Dave. As you look, and I think we can both, I think everybody agrees on it, Israel's got a fixed missile defense capability better than any place in the world, and starting at a layered capability on that. The application for our forward operating bases that we have a mass amount and we don't have the capacity to fit. And it looks like Iron Dome is performing with capability to take rockets from, I don't know, Tal, was it over 150 kilometers at some range at that point? That would seem to be in a very effective system for that transition over to forward operating bases. So and we don't want to say it's an experimental thing because it's live combat is what we're doing here. And we're going to get better at that combat by the more we see, the more things that they're challenging with salvos, all the ways they're trying to challenge us. Where do we go from here? Do we need more capacity, or do we need a newer system that can reduce the cost of intercept to lasers, etc., like that? And again, I don't think we can ever leave right of launch active missile defense. You have to have it, as you saw today with what's going on there. So I just wanted to just pop that real quick with you and have you give us a little perspective on where should we be going, because this threat's not going to go anywhere. It's going to continue to expand and get more complex. So is it a new architecture, or is it the architecture Israel has, or is it a cheaper way to take care of this?
Yeah, thanks, Riki. And I'll put some, but it starts with the architecture. You got to be able to talk. You got to be able to share data. You got to be able to share track data, targets, and so forth. But the U.S. Army, again, in my opinion, is moving in the right direction with the procurement of those 2 Iron Dome batteries. Iron Dome, as mentioned, celebrating the 10 years of the first engagement. This isn't a new system, and they've demonstrated clearly on several occasions, several thousand occasions, if I may say so, that it can put steel on target, so to speak. So Iron Dome has clearly demonstrated that it is capable of defeating mortars, rockets, unmanned aerial vehicles, and I know ongoing tests and experimentation against cruise missiles as well. Some of the challenges with my experience from the U.S. Army is the acquisition process. It's also the money. And so there are challenges with both money and the acquisition timeline that it takes to field a system as well, because at times it may take 5, 10, 15 years to field a system, and the enemy has already changed their tactics and moved on to another crude or potentially elementary capability that the enemy is successful with. We talk about expeditionary. We talk about forward operating bases. You know, how do you work on dispersion? Some of the passive measures, dispersion, the camouflage aspect of it. But ultimately, it takes either a very sophisticated non-kinetic capability and a kinetic capability to provide that defense, and ultimately the desire to have that layered defense to provide and protect those critical infrastructure.
Thanks, Dave. And you know, we would be remiss not to talk about MDA, because MDA has been the acquirer, not the U.S. Army, not the U.S. Air Force, with Israel to create this capability that they've done so well at doing. I would, you know, the system is designed, as we see for rockets, that cruise missile thing is not there yet for that. That's still a gap, as we all know, and as we move forward with it. I would now like to take this to the public and to the questions on board. And I have a good friend of MDAA's, a good friend of mine, retired Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery, who was the former 3 for Indo-PACOM and also on the Solarium with our Congress today on cyber. So welcome, Mark. You can lead off and with the questions.
Hey, thanks, Ricky. First, I'll take the first question while we wait for more people to flow them in, either in emails directly to MDAA or on YouTube and chat. And we do have some coming in there, so I'm happy to pass those on in just a minute. Tal, if I could start the first questions with you. The U.S. has some real issues with cruise missile defense. I thought David did a good discussion there of the challenges we've had. And Iron Dome, at least currently configured, not optimized for cruise missile defense, but Israel does have a great system in David Sling. First, are you seeing David Sling being needed to be in operation even over the last few nights or in general over the last year, or has the kind of threat that it's optimized for not been used regularly by the adversaries?
Well, as usual, good questions, and I try to answer diplomatically. First, you have to understand that David Sling is much more expensive, but this is not the only part of in the equation. It was designed specifically to cope with cruise missiles and maneuvering missiles, accurate missiles, and there is, of course, some overlap in the capabilities between Iron Dome and David Sling. So those two systems are complementary to each other. And you have to also remember that I'm living in Israel, and we are used to improvise. And just recently, there was an incident in which S-200, very old SA-5 missile was fired from Syria against one of our planes, and it traveled to the south part of Israel, and it was there was an attempt to intercept it, and it was not the first time. And at least in a few years ago, we fired an Arrow missile against an anti-aircraft missile. So if there is a threat in which the air defense forces are thinking that the best solution is to launch on David Sling, they will do it. So there is no limitation because it is costly and so on. So this is not the case. But until now, in this current round, we didn't have any need to use David Sling, because although Iron Dome is 10 years old since the first operational use, it is improving through time. And by the way, the cost is reducing. So it reduced every time of some new innovations are put in. So in the future, I hope that we won't see it in the next few days, but when we will have the threat of cruise missiles and of course maneuvering accurate rockets, sure, David Sling is the answer. And this was the decision was made in the first place to add another layer of defense to Iron Dome, between the Iron Dome and the Arrow 2. And don't forget and neglect Arrow 3, which is a space-based, it is operating in outer space.
I think thanks. That's a great summary of the spread of integrated air missile defense across the highly capable Israeli systems. Speaking of Iron Dome and potentially utilizing it, David, you talked a little bit about the procurement of the 2 batteries. What do you see as the challenges for integrating Iron Dome into U.S. systems? Are there going to be issues with the C2 or with Link, or how we do that? And if so, what's the kind of time frame for resolving those?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And the integration and the connectivity is the greatest challenge, and that has been the focus area. It was the focus area when I departed Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and it continues to be the focus area. Is how do you gain that connectivity vice a standalone system? We're all familiar when you have a standalone system. If there's no possibility of any type of advanced early warning, whether it's voice, whether it's transmission through data, that it can be very challenging. But again, connecting Iron Dome to the current architecture and the way forward architecture, and as I mentioned earlier, the Army's Integrated Air and Missile Defense Program, which consists of several future capabilities that are currently being tested and experimented with.
Hey, thank you very much. And of course, you remind me, and I'm sure Tal will have all the background on this, that we have successfully integrated Arrow and Aegis in a way that makes the 2 of them enhance and improve their capabilities and capacity. So certainly when you have 2 great partners like the United States and Israel, things like this are possible. Tal, we got a series of questions on YouTube about the nuts and bolts of Iron Dome, and I'll pass them to you as 3 questions. Take whichever ones you want. The first is, what's the largest yield of the Hamas rocket warheads that you all are seeing? The second is, is there an expectation that there might be non-conventional payloads on board? And I think they're talking there about things like chemical and biological. And then third, is the damage that you're seeing in Israel now, is it from the warhead payload going off, or is it really from just the rocket body? Okay,
so again, good questions from the audience. The exact weight of the warheads varies dramatically, and also I want to keep in mind of everybody that Hamas is not our only adversary in Gaza. There is the Islamic Jihad, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, with a whole different set of rockets. Some of them are very, very heavy, more than 100 kilograms. Today, Hamas announced a new rocket with a warhead weighing 250 kilograms. So this is not, of course, the weight of the explosives, but it's super heavy. So this is the answer also to the question about the damage. Most of the damage is, of course, inflicted by the explosives and the sheer weight of heavy rockets. The debris could cause some damage to cars and windows and so on, but this is quite minor damage. As for non-conventional warhead, chemical, biological, first of all, biological agents are not the best. It's not the best option to put them on a rocket, and we don't aware of any such capabilities by either Hamas, Hezbollah, or Islamic Jihad. And this applies also to chemical weapons. So this is not the case in which we are in any concern about this non-conventional threat. But again, if you could intercept high in the atmosphere So this is again another layer of protection if some adversary in the future will put some chemical agents inside a rocket.
Hey, thank you very much. That's great answers. The if I could pick up on something, and I hope I don't cause any after effects for David when I ask this question, but I think back to a time when the Army had J-Lens, a series of dirigibles that were that supported the defense of the national capital region. Do you see a future in which the introduction of dirigibles with airborne radars that can create a good cruise missile and rocket picture? Do you think that could come back into the future for the U.S. Army?
I do, Mark. And while I'm not overly familiar with J-Lens, I do know and understand the history behind it, and I've heard the stories firsthand. But over the horizon, sensor capability is critical. It is being tested and experimented with today by industry, and I think that it is the way forward. Mark, if I could go back to your previous three-part question to Tal, I just wanted to pile on, if I may. And Tal, Riki mentioned this, Tal mentioned this, and I hit on it a little bit during my pitch. Was, you know, the friendly forces, so to speak, has a limited number of interceptors. While we recognize that several of our adversaries, the terrorist organizations previously mentioned, and others globally, have tens of thousands of rockets in their arsenal. So it's imperative that it goes back to the network, but it goes also back to the technical means of these weapon systems, whether it's Iron Dome, whether it's Patriot, and so forth, that each of these systems and the operators are defending their critical asset, meaning there's no missile wastage because we don't have those interceptors to waste in the event if a enemy projectile is going to impact in the middle of the desert, as an example. There's no reason to engage that enemy projectile, and so missile wastage. First point. Second point is the debris aspect that you mentioned. Always a consideration. Obviously, very challenging and just as lethal at times as a projectile. So again, all the more reason, as Riki discussed, you know, getting to the left of launch before that enemy projectile even leaves the ground. But if and when it does leave the ground, that we have the capability and the capacity, whether it's the state of Israel, whether it's the United States, to engage that enemy projectile well in advance. Thank you.
Hey, Dave, Mark, just a second. I just ask Dave, you know, we're talking about joint, right? And I want to explore this a little bit. I mean, Israel's got the F-35. The F-35 is a phenomenal sensor platform that could help with what you're talking about of early warning, being able to distribute that aspect of it and send strike in, et cetera. You've also, you deployed the THAAD there for the first time, and you've got a TPY-2 there. So what they're doing over in Korea, before IBCS gets in play, you could force multiply your capacity pretty easily with that process. And I think CENTCOM's got to be looking at that aspect of it as well. And then I'll go back to what Mark said originally on the Aegis ship. I think we still have to deploy an Aegis ship there around it. So how do we bring all those capabilities that are sitting there? They're not connected yet, but that's where I think the future's got to be on that as we evolve through that. I just wanted to throw that out at you.
Yeah, thanks. And there is quite a bit of energy focused on that network of sensors, whether it is an F-35 queuing a Patriot weapon system and so forth. So you talk about some of the current operations ongoing in the Pacific. CENTCOM has a keen eye on that. If it's one system queuing another system, if it's one system providing launch capability of another system, absolutely. critical to get.
Aren't we on a, I mean, there's at some point where if this continues to saturate in this, that we're going to have to come in and help support on top of their capability. That's what those exercises were for that you ran, the Cobra. Is that near, or are we not even close to that in terms of having the U.S. come in to help?
Well, I mean, there are plans in place, but there are also the decision makers, and ultimately it's the Secretary of Defense from a military perspective. But the President of the United States, I'm sure, would weigh in on the decision making as well. But yes, to go back, every one of those exercises, every one of the planning sessions, terrain walks. The entire, when I was the commander of 10th LMEC, I took my key leaders with me, and we walked the ground in Israel of some of the go to war, for lack of better terms, go to war locations, both primary and alternate, while also simultaneously receiving from our Israeli partners history lessons. And so we clearly understood not just the actions today and tomorrow, but what got us in this position in the first place.
Hey, Riki, this is Mark. If I jump in on that and ask Tal a quick question, I would say I love all the idea of the U.S. joint capabilities, but we have to remember the geography, physics plays a role in this. Ships are really pressed to do this kind of low altitude detection from a distance. They would have to really close the shoreline, which puts them at risk for a different type of missile threat from both Hamas and Lebanese Hezbollah. So I'm not sure that would happen. The Tippy 2 that you're thinking about, look, I have no idea where it's pointed, but I hope it's pointed towards Iran. And that's not an easily swingable thing. So that's not that valuable. I think, though, an F-35 flying hours are pretty expensive for that mission. But I'll tell you what's a great idea, and what you needled up to here, which is, an idea of a 48 radar, of an Army air search radar could potentially be beneficial if the information from it could be reasonably transferred to the Israelis. But let me ask Tal a question. You showed great pictures there of those homemade missile systems. I mean, that's hard. Those look like OEM manufactured gear. I mean, that's kind of sad, surprising and shocking. But they can't have all the materials they need. Is there a supply chain? When you think of left to launch, like Riki likes F-16s for left to launch. I like ships capturing, embargoed weapons, for left to launch. Is there a supply chain that we can intercept that are bringing these materials into Gaza?
Well, of course, there is a supply chain, and we have an experience in catching some cargo ships with a lot of weapons. And we did it several times during the years with a lot of rockets. And by the way, anti-ship, shore-to-ship missiles, Iranian-made, and so on. So first, if a huge ship is coming towards Gaza, probably it will be detected. But a lot of the materials are either dual use, aluminum and ammonium perchlorate and so on, and you cannot inflict totally effective quarantine on technologies and raw materials. And we know this is the case in Yemen. This is the case with Iran. Of course, Iran is another issue because this is a state and so on. But then again, the efficiency of prevention is very limited. And I believe that in those types of rockets, it cannot be efficient at all. And you can see the sheer numbers of heavy rockets, thousands of rockets, heavy and long range, and tens of thousands with the medium to short range. So I believe it is too late to try to close the door from importing those parts and so on. And you have to also remember that those are not sophisticated weapons. This is an unguided rocket, and I cannot say how many rockets I built as a child, but many. And you know that today, with the knowledge all over the internet, not only the darknet, you cannot close the door behind it. So it is a fact of life. It is another issue if we are speaking about accurate rockets and guidance kits that, for example, Iran is making, I believe, for export. So this is another issue, and we will have to deal with it in the future.
Hey, thanks, Tal. Riki, I think we only have 4 minutes left. I want to ask each of the speakers if they want to take a minute or two to tell us, what their biggest takeaway from this experience is. And
Sure, thanks, Mark. I think, again, thanks, Riki and the MDAA for letting me have the opportunity to speak today, and I really appreciate it. And I really cherish our friendship as well. I think the capability is being clearly demonstrated by the state of Israel and the Iron Dome system. The 2 batteries that currently the U.S. Army possesses and that has American soldiers on, and is going through some testing, experimentation, and as mentioned previously, the networking, and can it pass data, can it connect to other systems and sensors? Only time will tell. But clearly, from a U.S. perspective, we've got to pursue that layered defense. That integration. I strongly believe it starts with the network, and then you build that layered defense around a capable network, so you can tie in all sensors and all shooters, and so you have no holes in your defense.
Yeah, just let me add to this. I think we should invest more in reducing the price of each interceptor, and to get some more batteries will be, of course, a blessed addition to our defensive capabilities. This goes by the way with thorough research about the incoming threats and capabilities of the future of the other side. So you have to have intelligence about their future plans in order to prepare your systems in advance. Laser, of course, it's another issue, and we don't have the time to go into all the details, but of course, laser will be, no doubt about it, in the future, integrated into a multi-layered defense system. So I don't think it will be the sole solution. It will be a complementary part of this because of its inherent limitations, but it will be part of the defense. And of course, integrating Iron Dome, David Sling, or other systems in ships, in future ships of the Israeli Navy. Of course, this will be a force multiplier, and we will probably see it in the not so far future.
thanks, Riki. Over to you. Thank you, Tal. Thank you, Dave. Riki, pass it back to you to close us.
Hey, thanks, Mark. Thanks, Tal. Thanks, Dave. Just a great discussion that probed and pushed intellectual thought on what we need to do, what we've done. But let's get down to the common theme that I think is so important for the world to know, the public to know. This system has defended close to 5 million people today. And there's a lot of people that think that, hey, if you can't have 100% missile defense capability, why deploy? And this is a valid reason. It is survival, and the fact that we're able to sustain not going into an all-out war because of this capability that's in place today is huge. And it's a lesson for the world to look at and see how you mitigate going to war by having this capability that defends the population and prevents you to escalate to another level. That's significant on that aspect of it. And I think the world's got to look at the fact that left of launch, this is not going to be 100%. It's not even going to be a guarantee. Look at this inventory being thrown at you from not a very sophisticated group that's massing these kind of numbers. And we're not able to stop it. We're not. So you can't rely just on left of launch on offense. And I go back to this point. I mean, defense matters. We spend 2% of our DoD budget on defense. That's it. Everything else is going offense. So this is a lesson for all of us. It's a huge lesson, and it's a validation of what two partners, two countries can do together, because you got to share the cost. That's a lot of money. And what we're doing in Israel, and we're sharing those experiences, is making us better at what we do to negate and defend against these threats. This is the threat of the future right now. It is escalating, and thank God for Israel. Thank God for the U.S., and thank God that we can do this together and get better. We got to get better, because that other side is going to get better. So thank you all for taking the time today. It was so pertinent that we could talk to you from Tel Aviv, where you're at the point, and Dave as a former commander of Europe, and that part of it, that's huge. I want to thank my staff, Kyle and Brandon, knocked this thing out of the park to put this together this quickly. So we didn't get to everybody's questions. So if you want to send those questions to us or to Kyle, we'll be glad to filter those both to you, Dave, and Tal, to be able to respond to those questions for them. So thank you for a great opportunity to educate on this particular subject in this particular time. It was great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.